Hey there, everybody. So this is going to be a walkthrough of how to set up the AI SDR workflow. It's one of the more complicated ones, so this video might be a bit long. Feel free to drag around and find what you need. But at a high level, there are really three phases here. Sorry if it lags. It's about the limit that an N8 N canvas can really contain. First phase is essentially creating the contact, enrichment, and verification, and then some domain and social discovery for the prospect. Then we set up a four-step email flow that sends personalized emails to the prospect until they respond or until the sequence is up. And when they do respond, if they respond, that we move over to the next phase 4, where we handle any sort of responses that we have, an agent that has the information that it needs in order to respond to different types of questions or concerns that they might express via email. Now, the phase 3 that we might have overlooked here is essentially just human notification intervention, where we send an SLAC notification, optionally, of course. So in order to set this up, we've tried to identify every single area where a credential is essentially needed, and that'll be outlined in red, except over here where there's an beyond that, all other red frames are to be set up with some sort of credential. Now, there's a series of them that we're going to walk through. I'll do my best to show you exactly how to get it done. Just note that credentials across any platform are essentially the same. If you want to integrate them into each other, there's usually some type of passcode, some type of API that's required. So first things first, the initial step, the trigger doesn't need setting up. There's a webhook. A webhook is something like a URL that you can use and add to other platforms. When a lead is captured or when some sort of event is propagated inside the system, we capture the data, we bring it in. Now the CRM, we have a high-level CRM, go high level, but you can also integrate any other CRM. Here we have HubSpot and Salesforce. There are also optional. You can also use Close, ClickUp, whatever you might want to use, Airtable even. But for purposes of this walkthrough, we're going to start with OpenAI, their standard. So for OpenAI, for any sort of credential, you're going to have to set up an NADN. You click this pencil button, and then we have to find the API key. So if you haven't set this up yet, you essentially just Google search OpenAI API. You create an account via that landing page, and then you end up at a page like this. You go up to your settings, you go to the left to the API's keys, and you go to the top right to create a new security. You name it the name of this workflow for personal management, and then you copy paste that secret key back over into the API key. Now there, that's just set up the OpenAI credential for the entire workflow in the workspace. So next we go to Hunter.io. Hunter.io is basically just like an email verification platform. So we create a new credential. We need an API key for this as well. So we have that open in the background. Just look up Hunter.io, create an account, go through the survey workflow, the onboarding process. At a certain point, you'll ask what you're using Hunter for. Click API, and then it'll bring you to this page where you can copy that API and paste that in for use. So there are other platforms you can use other than Hunter to verify the email address. I'll show you how you want to set that up. Hunter is the one that's integrated here. Next is Telegram. For Telegram is essentially, if it's about email or not, then we have Telegram that sends a message, right? And when it sends the message, it tries to edit field and bring it back in to merge, to then go back in and try to re-verify that email address. So here we create a credential where we have an access token. We use the Telegram API. Though the Telegram API, there are several, but the bot API is usually one of the better ones to you because that's like an interface for any sort of, apps that you're trying to create. Now, the Telegram API is basically one of the better ones to use as well. We'll just use the API that you'd like. I get the API token, paste it in here like always, and then you can move forward. Now, next we set up an enrichment step. Here we don't have that in particular setting. We have Common Room and we have Gone. Those are two different, really good enrichment platforms to try to gain more information about that prospect. That Common Room is the industry best at the moment. Gong is a good alternative and lower cost. Ultimately, that's up to you. You can have to delete this and just reintegrate into the if-else statement. Now, what happens next is we already have these open AI credentials set up. So we now go over here if we find that that's actually that tap into the if-else. If it's a full domain or just a company, then if it has a domain, that we're basically going to try to scrape it, and we scrape it using Apify. Now over here, you'll see the type of script, that website content color. One way or another, an API key is used, a value is used, and then that's essentially how we need to set it up. There's also this that sets up the overall settings for it. As you can see, there's a lot of things going on here, but we're really just trying to get only what we need and remove everything that we don't. So how do we get that from? Well, you go to apify.com, and once you have an account, you go to settings, and then you go to integration. So settings are going to be on the bottom left, and then you go to API integrations, and then you have your key, copy that over, and you paste that into either credential, which is usually what I'm not like an authentication step, right? Or you can just put it into the token here. But from there, you can do the same with the other Avify steps here and throughout the rest of this workflow. There's also here a Google Gemini chat model. That requires an API key as well. Gemini is a bit more complicated, but generally speaking, if you look up Gemini API key, you'll basically find the Google AI Studio. And once you sign into there to aistudio.google.com, you can get an API key like this. And then from there, go through all this and you create an API key. And then you basically, same as the other ones, copy paste the generated API key over into the API key section here. So from there, we keep moving forward, more API 5 steps, which require more authentication and tokens. Just probably paste your API key to all of those. We've already set the majority of those up. Now we have Anthropic. For Anthropic, it's a bit more complicated, but we go to Anthropic API like this, build with cloud. We start building, takes you to the Anthropic console, and there you can get an API key, and you name it the same as the workflow, you and copy paste in to the same API key. So from there, we already have the OpenAI chat model, and we have the Google console relatively set up. So one thing, in case it isn't set up yet, we're going to want to connect your Google authentication into NADAM. It's one of the more complicated ones. There are docs here that explain exactly how to go about it. The only thing with this step or this credential setup process, and they get to use Google Cloud for it, but there are step-by-step instructions on exactly how to go about it. You ultimately get a client ID and get a client secret, which is like the past, like an API key, and you add it in here. Now for the knowledge base that we need to set up, this knowledge base is usually, it's just a Google Doc. The Google Doc should have information about how you should, about your own, basically, business or the business that you're saying is up for. So this is how we basically use it. It helps set everything up, and it uses the knowledge base as additional context. Now let's keep moving on the workflow. So then we don't make this too long. Google Auth Must was already set up, so has an OpenAI, so has a knowledge base, a different capacities. So a lot of this is now set up earlier in the process. You just need to take note of wherever these are, so then you can toggle on those credentials. Now for Slack, this is up to you how you'd like to use it. These red variables are essentially what they're called. They're being extracted from earlier in the process. It's basically just the fields that you can optionally update and use to notify yourself of anything that's needed. Now, of course, don't use any of anything that we show you here. There'll be a bad person thing to do. Don't use anybody's personal credentials to log into anything or use anything else. Be a good person. But ultimately, you go through that same process. You get your client the client secret from Slack in their settings and integrations page, and then that's how you move forward from there, okay? So that means that phase 1 and phase 2 have all been set up. As you can tell, like if you set up one credential, it usually handles all the rest. So what else do we need to set up? Credentials here, an Airtable. For Airtable, there's also a credential that needs to be created with an access token. Access token for Airtables specifically is in the Airtable account. You can go to the settings, and this doc shows you exactly where to go. It's right here inside of the credentials. Google Calendar also basically does the same stuff. Now, over here, all of these basically just need to have their credentials toggled on for Airtable, Gmail, and Google Calendar. And last but not least, there's OpenAI module at the bottom. So that's basically the credential process. I know that was very high level. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't get that too deep in the weeds and make this one of a set of process. Now, how do you customize this for yourself becomes a question. Well, after you set up the credentials, I'm not going to be able to go through every single LLAM step or every single AI steps. But generally speaking, if you were to double click into one of these, you always have a prompt of some sort that gives it some sort of instruction on how to go about whatever you need. However, whatever that step handles, you can go through every single one of these steps. You can update it according to your company and your company expertise, and that is required. So here, one thing that you'll find is that there is a company name already here, as example, called Promptable. What you're going to find is that they're promptable. So you see how there's email address, this HGBS. These are going to be more generic and scrumptive information. What you need to do is you need to replace it with your own. And you'll find that happening within every single one of these steps. So go through every single one of these and make sure that they're all fine-tuned according to your company and your requirements, okay? And you're going to end up learning by going through the process how to better set up LM steps and how to prompt them correctly for different information, for different goals and outputs. Now that's basically the process. We do have some of this process that I just went through over here on the side. You're going to go ahead and read that. There's also some thinking about what type of agents to use when. That's good to know, good to learn. But overall, that's the setup process for the AI SDR. Just make sure to, again, set up those credentials, customize, and update every single one of the LL steps towards your company. Create the knowledge base and integrate that in, and basically make sure that it's integrated into your tech stack as well, especially around the CRM, S, and the rest. And that's basically the AI SDR, everybody. So reach out with any questions. I know this was just one that's going to be a bit more complicated, but really useful, really fruitful, and looking forward to what you all end up building with this.